Okay, hello everyone. My name is Eric Masowski, and today we're going to be doing a quick around the world tour of the 3D Studio Max user interface. 3D Studio Max is fairly well organized. Once you get a hold of how it is organized, it becomes a lot easier to just play with the software and explore it at your own pace. What we're going to be focusing on today are just a couple of key areas of the user interface so that if you want to get started and start playing with the software, you will know where to go and you'll know where to find certain key areas. In the next lesson, what we'll end up doing is we'll end up actually creating objects, moving them around, and altering them in various ways. Okay, so let's get started. At the very top is your File menu. Your File menu has a lot of the functionality of 3D Studio Max that's also represented by icons elsewhere in the interface. So you'll have things like create, standard primitives, sphere, tori, pyramid, and so on, animation constraints and controllers, rendering options, customizing how Max behaves, scripting, and the online help. I highly recommend checking out the online help. It's actually pretty good, pretty thorough, and the tutorials are good as well. Okay, now directly below your file menu is your toolbar. Your toolbar has a lot of the common, options or processes that you're going to end up doing. So you see that you have an undo and redo. You have linking options for creating parent-child relationships. You have selecting options, selecting methods. Then you have your transforms, so move, rotate, and scale. Then you have the coordinate system that these transforms operate on. So are you going to be rotating along the view coordinate system, the world coordinate system, or the local coordinate system? Further on down from that are your snaps. Your snaps basically allow you to move objects more precisely. And then a few other ones that we'll go into a little bit later on. Now you may notice that as I move my cursor over an empty space in the toolbar, it turns into a hand. This lets me know that there's actually more icons than what are currently being shown. So if we move the cursor into an empty space to get our hand, and then click and drag the mouse to the left, you see that it opens up and exposes several additional icons. Now a couple ones worth noting right now is this one right here, which is your material editor. This is where you'll modify all your surface properties. Next to that are your rendering options. So whether you want to specify the resolution that you want to render to, the file to save it to, and so on, this is where you're going to go. And then this is just a quick render. It uses whatever options you previously have set. Now, directly underneath the toolbar, you have your command panel. Your command panel has, a lot of functionality for 3D Studio Max, and you're going to find yourself going back and forth quite a bit. So the command panel is broken up into 6 tabs, and each of these tabs can kind of be thought of as a mode. But changing these modes doesn't alter anything in your viewport. It just exposes new functionality that you can do. So the very first tab is your Create tab. And whenever you want to create a new object, this is where you're going to go. So if you want to create a sphere, this is where you go. If it's a box, this is where you go. If you want to create particle systems, a new light, a new camera, helper objects, whatever, this is where you're going to find yourself. And underneath the Create tab, you see that we have several subcategories. The first one here is geometry. And underneath geometry, you see that it says standard primitives, and we have spheres, box, tube, planes, and so on. But if we click on the drop-down list, you see we have several additional categories for objects. So we can go to particle systems, we can go to doors, windows, architectural objects, stairs, and any third-party primitives that may exist. Directly to the right of that are your shapes. Shapes are basically 2D lines. And so right here we have a circle, so that could be, compared to like a sphere, just a flat circle. a rectangle, a donut, text, a helix, and so on. To the right of that are your lights. This is where you'll go when you want to create new lights. We have standard, photometric, and any third-party ones that you need. Photometric is basically lights that behave using real-world physical properties. So it uses candelas, lux, and lumens instead of just an arbitrary 0 to 1 multiply factor. To the right of that are your cameras. Next up are helper objects to make your life a little bit easier, like dummy objects, tape measures, compass, protractor, and so on. To the right of that are space warps, which are kind of like special effects, forces, deflectors for particle systems, and so on. And then to the right of that are systems. Systems are kind of like groups of helpers and other objects that all work together for a common goal. A good example of this is the daylight system. The daylight system has several helper objects in a single light. And what this system allows you to do is it allows you to specify a location around the world, like via longitude, latitude, or picking it from a list. You can also specify the time of day, the date, the year, all that great information. And it will accurately position the light source to represent the sun, at that time, on that day, in that location. So you can get some very, precise lighting out of it. Now, the four large boxes in the middle of your view or in the middle of your screen are your viewports. We have a top viewport, a front viewport, a left viewport, and a perspective. These can often be thought of as windows into your scene. So the left viewport is as if you were looking at your scene from the side. Front is if you're looking at it from straight on. Top as if you were like in a high crane and you were just looking down on your scene. Perspective is kind of like an arbitrary view. You can rotate it and adjust it however you want. Now you notice that I have a yellow bar around my viewport. This lets me know that the perspective view is the current viewport, or the active viewport. We can change the active viewport by just clicking in the various views with the left mouse or with the right mouse. Now, if you're new to 3D graphics, like using programs like Max, Maya, XSI, and so forth, I highly recommend you use the top, front, and left viewports for your initial, like when you're moving objects, aligning them, and so forth. The reason for this is that the top, left, and front viewports are orthographic views, meaning that they don't take perspective into consideration. So you can get a much more accurate alignment of objects, because perspective can really play some nasty tricks on you if you're not careful. Now, below your viewports is your timeline. Your timeline represents, the duration of animation that you're currently looking at. And so you can move through the timeline by clicking and dragging on the little bar here, or clicking in the empty space to jump to a particular spot, or use the little arrows on either side of the bar. Okay, now below that we have several different key areas to take a quick look at. The first one is your viewports, viewport controls, which is in the lower right hand corner of your screen. This is where you can zoom your viewport, rotate it, zoom onto a particular object, or pan it. To the left of that are your VCR or DVD-like controls. It allows you to jump around in the timeline in various ways. To the left of that are your key creating tools. So if you're already familiar with keyframes and how they operate, this is where you'll end up creating them. To the left of that is your basic status readout. So if I move the cursor in, say, the top view here and look at the bottom of the screen, you can see it gives a readout of roughly where my cursor is in space. Later on, when we go over the move, rotate, and scales, what you can do is you can actually type in explicit values here or relative values here to move an object to a very specific spot or move it a certain amount from its current location. Very, very helpful. And then over here on the left-hand side, the top one here is basically a status readout. So if Max encounters an error, it may output right here. And right below it is where you can actually type in Max script or scripting commands. And see how they operate. Then on the left-hand side are your Reactor tools. Reactor is basically Max's physics-based system, which is derived from Havoc, which was featured in recent games such as Half-Life 2. This is a fairly advanced topic, so we won't be getting into that for a little bit. Okay, so if you have any questions, by all means email me or post on the forums, and thank you very much.